right, I'm here with contributing writer Jake Fogelman to talk a little bit about the latest news outside of the situation in Ukraine. This week we have a couple stories on preemption, right? State preemption laws that sort of prevent localities from passing gun laws that are stricter than those at this level. But what was the first one? We got Colorado, right? They just repealed their preemption law, and now we're seeing some movement in that state.
That's right. So we saw a little bit of movement earlier when the city of Denver instituted a ghost gun ban. We haven't really seen any major moves in the state just as of yet. As you pointed out, last year they repealed their nearly 2 decades old preemption law, largely because of the city of Boulder. So everyone was wondering when would the city of Boulder take advantage of this law? And it turns out the city council just officially gave the green light to go ahead and start drafting a series of very sweeping gun ordinances, ranging from an assault weapons ban, magazine ban, open carry ban, and severely limiting concealed carry as well. So they're going full speed ahead on taking advantage of the preemption repeal.
Interesting, because Boulder was one of the places that was pushing the limits on this before the state law got effectively repealed. They had passed an assault weapons ban, right, and they were going to start, I guess, charging people, rounding them up and arresting them for violating it, right?
That's right. Back in 2018, shortly after the Parkland shooting, when gun control advocacy was at its previous peak, Boulder stepped in and did its own ordinance limiting magazine capacity and, as you said, banning assault weapons by make and model. And it was sued under the state's preemption law, and over the course of a couple of years in court battles, it was struck down under that preemption law. But in 2021, the city actually had a mass shooting at a grocery store that spurred new action from the state legislature to get rid of the preemption law. Now here we are.
Right. So they're back at the forefront of this fight in Colorado, and they haven't passed these ordinances yet, right? This is what they're considering doing in the upcoming session here. And there's been pushback already on this from some gun rights advocates. Is that correct?
That's right. So the Mountain States Legal Foundation was who represented the gun owners in Boulder, the last lawsuit challenging the last assault weapons ban. And they talked to me about these proposals that are currently being drafted by the city of Boulder. And they're already pushing back and saying, the last time that they tried to institute this stuff, it cost the city a couple of years and litigation. And just because that preemption is no longer the law of the land, there are still state and federal considerations. Colorado has a state amendment that guarantees the right to arms. Obviously, the Second Amendment guarantees the right to arms. So you could see, depending on how these ordinances pan out, more legal challenges going forward.
Right, certainly. But one place moving in the opposite direction is Utah, right? You wrote a story about this as well. Utah is strengthening their preemption law, is that right?
That's right. Yeah, it's kind of an interesting breakdown. 2 states directly next to each other moving in opposite directions. It's kind of indicative of the broader trend that we're seeing in preemption, where you have some states moving to whittle away preemption protections or grant more local control for firearms ordinances. And you see other states strengthening state control. So Utah is one of those states where they just passed a bill. They already had a preemption law, but they essentially did an enhanced preemption law and gave it enforcement teeth. So if any locality within the state does violate the spirit of that preemption law, they can be sued for civil damages, and they can be enjoined by a court order that essentially nullifies any gun control law that they pass. So that's on its way to the governor. I reached out to the governor's office to see if he's going to sign it or veto it. They never got back to me. But it is a Republican governor in the state of Utah, so odds are there's probably a good chance that it does make it into law. And it's just interesting to see the state of preemption fights just between those 2 states.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, that's been one of the common complaints among gun rights activists on state preemption laws. Obviously, this was a movement that was very successful a couple decades back, getting these sorts of laws put in place to prevent. The complaint was always there is a spider web of network of different laws even within a state, and so somebody could get caught up in that without realizing that they'd done anything wrong. And that was the logic behind these. But there was always a complaint that they weren't really enforceable, or at least not easily enforceable. And so you've seen some states try to strengthen the enforcement provisions by letting people sue over this. And then Pennsylvania had done it, and then that got tossed out on a technicality in the way the bill was passed. But now, so now you're seeing other states get into the game on this, other red states at the least. And blue states are, the momentum is in the other direction, where they're trying to get rid of some of these preemption laws because they've long wanted to do that, gun control activists, because they feel that cities should be able to have different, stricter, essentially, gun laws than the outlying areas around them. And so they've really been passing these laws without, as a way of challenging preemption throughout the country. And they've really been losing most of those cases over the years, including the one in Boulder. So now you're actually seeing them have some success in changing the state laws as opposed to trying to challenge them by just violating them effectively. So there's definitely something that is going to be a major issue, I think, in the gun debate over the next several years here moving forward. And you're probably going to see these diverging trends like you see on, red flag laws or constitutional carry or any number of these other policies that have moved in the opposite directions, whether you're in a red or blue state. So that's definitely something we're going to stay on top of for sure. And you're in Colorado, so you have a front row seat to this big gunfight there.
Yeah, I remember very well when this passed last year. And to your point about how these pushes to give more local control is really just a shorthand for only stricter control. Colorado's statute, where they repealed preemption, specifically says it's called like a Local Control and Firearms Regulation Act or something along those lines. But their definition of local control means you can only enact something that is more stringent than state law. You cannot do anything less stringent than state law. So it's a kind of a play on words and what local control really means. How much local control do you really have if you can't go both ways? But
it's kind of the exact opposite of a state preemption law.
Sure.
What they've traditionally been, because traditionally they've been about making it so that localities can't pass gun laws that are stricter than what the state has imposed. And you still see that in the vast majority of the country. You see fights over this constantly in Pennsylvania. But you've also seen, Colorado is not the first state to chip away at these state level protections. You saw this in Virginia, where I am,
right,
as well. Back in 2020, at the time, the democratically controlled state house and governor signed a law that repealed parts of the preemption statute that we have here in Virginia, which effectively let localities pass their own rules about where people can carry, let them restrict gun carry in places like parks and government buildings and permitted events or events that should be permitted. So like large gatherings of people, essentially any large gathering of people, even if they didn't actually get a permit to gather, you couldn't carry. So that, and you've seen a number of cities in Virginia adopt these sorts of resolutions, including, Arlington and Alexandria up in Northern Virginia near Washington, D.C., and then Richmond, the capital of Virginia, has done it as well. So it's definitely something that's not reserved to one or two states, and it's very, very likely going to be an ongoing battle throughout the country.
Sure.
And it's something that is one of the top fights at the state level, I think, moving forward here over the next 5 or 10 years.